Welcome to Never Too Serious with Scott and Dave. I'm Scott.
And I'm Dave.
We're talking about depopulation, Dave. You kind of brought it up. Why does this interest you?
Well, it interests me because, there's a lot of conspiracy theories of how people might want to do that. And there's some powerful people out there that have implied that it could be beneficial. Bill Gates, he's discussed about, how the impacts population have on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a guy I happen to like. I don't agree with him on everything, but all around I think he's a solid dude, and I think he's important enough to listen to. It's Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
And he had I don't remember what year it was. It wasn't like last year. It was relatively recent, but it was a few years back. He had I don't know which one. He was on stage with Jack Ma, some billionaire.
He's the what's the Alibaba?
Yeah.
He's the CEO of Alibaba.
Yeah, and they were discussing AI, and Elon talked about one of the biggest concerns is depopulation, and he was like, "You hear what I said? I didn't say overpopulation. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but something similar." He goes, "I said depopulation, not enough people." And so I think he's onto something. And listening to other people, they're discussing perhaps why we need to have less people. And so it's like, just stuff on purpose, starts raising my eyebrow, going, what's going on? And then when you dive in, now you have conspiracy theories, you have a lot of things that realistically happened that has taken a lot of population down.
Well, and he's describing as a concern, though, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, Gates not so much.
Right, he's saying population is a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's definitely a possibility of two sides of the spectrum, but one thing to agree on, it's a problem. It's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Problem or not, it's an issue. Because if people both have two different people of, I don't know, they are equally heard. They're both powerful people, and whether you like them or not, and it's kind of smart to listen to what they have to say sometimes, because they might be telling you something.
Well, I do have Gates talking about depopulation, and when you said you want to talk about depopulation, I went and looked at a bunch of different stuff, and I brought up this clip from Bill Gates because there's a lot of conspiracy theorists that use his clips from this TED Talk to further this idea that there's some big agenda from the rich and powerful to reduce the population, and the methods that they will use in order to reduce the population. Yeah. So I brought a clip. Do you want to watch it?
Because
it's a little long, though.
Right. I want to hear it because it's not, the people that are saying that, they're saying he's saying it directly, but he's not. He's saying something similar,
mm-hmm.
but not directly. But I could see where they're getting that, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll play it.
Yeah.
It's a little long. We'll see if folks are falling asleep by the time they get to the end of it.
It is Bill Gates.
It is Bill Gates. All right, so Bill Gates had a TED Talk talking about climate and some of the impacts that it has, and then what we need to be doing about it.
Sure.
I'm going to talk today about energy and climate. And that might seem a bit surprising because my full-time work at the Foundation is mostly about vaccines and seeds, about the things that we need to invent and deliver to help the poorest 2 billion live better lives. But energy and climate are extremely important to these people. In fact, more important than to anyone else on the planet. The climate getting worse means that many years their crops won't grow. There'll be too much rain, not enough rain. Things will change in ways that their fragile environment simply can't support. And that leads to starvation. It leads to uncertainty. It leads to unrest. So the climate changes will be terrible for them. We need to meet a new constraint. And that constraint has to do with CO2. CO2 is warming the planet. And the equation on CO2 is actually a very straightforward one. If you sum up the CO2 that gets emitted, that leads to a temperature increase. And that temperature increase leads to some very negative effects. The effects on the weather, perhaps worse, the indirect effects in that the natural ecosystems can't adjust to these rapid changes, and so you get ecosystem collapses.
Okay, so just looking at what he's setting up for his argument is that the environmental impact is massive, and he's leading to the reason why is human population.
Sure.
In his initial description of it, though, when he's talking about, it's going to be dry and then it's going to be super wet. It's like he's making it sound like it's this very chaotic sort of thing. And it's been pretty consistent with, he had pictures of, African children.
He wants to save all these people by...
Well, he's talking about vaccination and is his big one. But he's saying, well, we need to make sure that the climate is less chaotic, less highs and lows, less of these things in order to give their sensitive ecosystem, a balance. But that, I think, sounds like kind of a weird lie to me, because they've been adapting for, million years. The climate has been changing and people adapt to those changes, and the crops that they're, at least 100,000 years here. This is what humans have been doing. They adapt to these things. And with the technology we have, that we then, whatever comes at us, we adapt and make it work. And I understand the poorer populations maybe doesn't have access to some of these things, but they still have been doing this for so many generations.
Right, but he wants to help those poorer populations. They want to help them strive, but we have too many people.
Yeah. Well, and so now he's going to go into his little spiel about this equation. But I just felt like he's kind of setting up a scenario here that I don't think is rooted in the realities of how well people adapt to changing climate or changing whatever.
How do we get here?
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah.
Come on.
All right, he continues.
This equation has four factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy.
Okay,
so you see the biggest problem there? If you cut people, S, E, and C are not a problem.
Yeah, so his equation, it's like algebra, an area of math I was not very good at. But he's got CO2 on one side of the equal sign, and then he's got P times S times E times C. P stands for people, S is for services per person, E is for energy per service, and the last is CO2 per unit of energy.
Right.
And so what he's trying to do is if you're gonna basically make CO2 zero, then this little equation has to equal zero.
Well, is this like keeping track of your carbon footprint in the world?
It's more. I mean, really, it's more than that. I mean, because he's just right now. The first one is people.
Right.
Don't look at other sources of carbon dioxide. I mean, think about all the cows. Come on.
Right. Well, you have people, and then we have the services that we do. In other words, the things that we do that take energy, and then we have to see how much CO2 is needed to create the energy for the stuff that the people do. And again, it's a people problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so he's going to go on and talk about that.
Oh.
So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero.
That's which one that is?
Back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase
that sounds
of
a little funny.
About 1.3.
If you do a really good job on vaccinations, they could decrease the population a certain percentage.
Yeah.
So I got to stop here for a second. So hearing this, and I don't remember the date. Do you remember the date that this was when he had this TED Talk?
I don't recall.
Was it pre-COVID?
Yes,
I
definitely.
thought it was.
It was pre.
Okay, so when people hear this and go, we had COVID, and what was bigger than COVID? The vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell is he up to? You know?
Yeah.
Whether it's conspiracy or not, it makes you think. Makes you, well, I don't know if you're a thinking type. It'll make you think, like, what's going on? Is this something? Could it be something? What? Well, that's the kind of an odd statement. It should be. It could help. You would think that we have more population if these vaccines were great.
So his argument throughout this TED Talk is really, I mean, it's trying to figure out a way to, reduce carbon to save the planet, and because humans are a big creator of carbon, modifying birth rates and the amount of things that humans do to reduce CO2. And just looking at his big old focus of vaccines, his organization has put so much money into vaccines, and not just for COVID, but for other stuff. And but this video has been quoted from a lot of the conspiracy theorists, and this is where the video actually came from. So now we're looking at a screen where the conspiracy people are talking about what Bill Gates aims to do. And
maybe,
I think
you should reread that.
And I think it's a little like mischaracterization of what he was actually saying in this particular TED Talk. But I'm gonna read it to you. It says, if we do a really good job, so this is the author talking about Bill Gates' his video. If we do a really good job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive services, we can lower that by 10 to 15%. 10% equals, that's a big number. That's like 700 million. Is that right?
Yeah.
700 million will be reduced. 15% would be just over $1 billion would be reduced.
So if you have healthcare, should help people live longer while more people are having babies.
Mm-hmm.
Your population grows. If you have new vaccines, you could be healthier. You could overcome certain diseases that would hurt you or kill you in typically.
Mm-hmm.
And then you still be having babies, and you would have, bigger population. And if you have help with the reproductive services, then maybe even people that can't have kids can have kids, and people that have that are pregnant that have, maybe may lose their child, and they might be able to save them. You would think there'd be more babies being born. So how would that? Why would that be lowering the population?
Well, so there's a few different factors that I'm seeing here. In more, I would say, wealthy countries, the birth rate is actually less than 2 per couple. Well, in order to have a sustainable population, you got to have at least 2. If you start going below that, then, because we're talking potential deaths, and not both of those kids are going to survive to necessarily be reproducing themselves. Some choose not to. The birth rate is dependent on how many children a couple is having, and in a lot of wealthy countries, the birth rate is actually very low, less than what sustainable numbers would be. And when you're talking about what Gates is talking about with lowering the birth rate, it's already happening in more wealthy countries. I pulled up this website. There's a bunch of websites that track birth rates and population growth.
Mm-hmm.
This one in particular is from worldbank.org.
And they're all going down.
And so we just have it sorted by country: Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria. Just Afghanistan, their rate is, since this was gathered in 2019, 4.3, and it's on its way down.
Yeah.
Albania, 1.6, and it's just getting to the point where it's leveling out. It's been coming down for years.
Mm-hmm.
If we sort this by the highest numbers, Niger is at 6.8. So they actually have a high birth rate, but it's also on its way down. Somalia, 6 per family. Congo, 5.8, Chad 5.6. We start moving down the list, and you start seeing some more westernized countries that have birth rates that are less than 2. We're not even down there yet.
Wow.
I mean, if you even go all the way down to Qatar,
Colombia 1.8.
1.8. Armenia,
Brazil,
Iceland 1.8,
1.7.
New Zealand 1.7. Yeah, Germany. Oh, I just missed it. Let's see here. Croatia 1.5, Thailand 1.5.
Right, and that's not sustainable.
Italy 1.3, Spain 1.2. I mean, just for us, looking in our own household, I have 2 kids. You have 1 kid.
Mm-hmm.
We are below the
Right, absolutely.
And if you think about in America, what would be the factors that would go into a small family or low birth rate?
That would go. What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, what would
what
be
would create it?
Yeah, I mean, what would be the process like? Not process. That's a different show.
Well, that's
but what would be the reason to have a small family? Just off
financial reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Scare of maybe you having a birth defect. Maybe somebody had a kid that has a birth defect, and they're concerned of the next one will too.
Mm-hmm. And which really ties down to effort, resources, right? Not because they'd be more dependent on you.
Mm-hmm.
Not
sure.
Because you think about some of these countries early on, high birth rates were really related, unless it was religious. It was really related to you need to have enough kids so that you're going to have a bunch that will survive, because the death rate, the child death rate was pretty high. And then you also had the need for support of the family. The more kids that you have,
Mm-hmm.
the more support then becomes available for the family, because the kids can participate in making sure things are taken care of. Even some of these more famous families where they have 20 kids or whatever it is, most of those kids are then helping support the child rearing of the other kids, the siblings.
You probably touched on it, but back in the day, Homestead Live, you had a bunch of kids to help with to bring up your life. You had to get extra help on the helping hands to make everything happen.
Yeah, and now we don't need that.
Nope, we got to push a button.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. Think about women and their role in the process of child rearing.
Right.
If women are in the workforce, if they have more options in their life than to be a wife and raise babies, don't you think they'd not want to have as many kids?
Sure.
They got other options,
That.
other choices that they can make. So in a more modern society like we're living in, it just seems there's less incentive to create a bigger family.
Naturally, that's how we're growing that too.
Mm-hmm.
So again, why would boosting or having vaccines and helping the healthcare and all that stuff, why is that not helping all this situation?
So
why is it making it worse?
Yeah. So my take on this is that if Gates is working on vaccines and trying to reduce deaths, but also wanting to maintain a population that's not growing at a huge rate, we are already doing that in most of the world already, even in China.
Right.
So
he's just saying, hey, he's just seeing something that's going down and says, I want to accomplish this, buy my product. And look, it's happening.
I'm not even sure why he would be making the argument. And as far as like conspiracy theorists saying that he's trying to reduce, it's already happening because of other reasons that we just talked about.
Right, I agree.
Yeah.
But it's not happening fast enough, is the concern, is what they're saying. Is this might be happening as we know it because of those reasons we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's people out there that need it to happen sooner than this will happen.
Here's another little stat. Low income, the birth rate is generally 4.6. Lower middle income is 2.7. Okay. Low and middle income, 2.5. As you start moving into upper middle income, you're at 1.8, and high income is at 1.6. So the wealthier, typically, the lower the birth rate.
It's because the wealthier can afford other hobbies than just effing.
They
Everybody else is like, "What you got to do today?" I don't know. I think we're going to have to do sex again. You don't want to go shooting? I ain't got a gun. You want to play a video game? I ain't got a video game system. Do you want to go race cars? I ain't got a race car. What are you going to do? Well, sex is free. Well, until you have a kid. And I want to also say this: whether you like it or not, I hope you don't, so you could respond to it. A lot of the low incomes, they get a lot of perks for all those kids. And so they get more money from the government by having more kids to help them along too.
That's very true.
So instead of getting that helping hand to go out there and till the ground and plant a garden and herd the cattle, they get money this way.
Yes, there is a government incentive to have children. And at least in the United States, here in Oregon, when you have more children, that changes the ratio of your income to, basically what you're allowed to receive from the government in, let's just say food, like food stamps, EBT
Support.
or whatever it is, welfare programs. The more kids you have and the lower income you have, the more you receive of those benefits. And there is an incentive for some of these folks to have more children, or at least not do the things necessary to prevent, and we're talking like contraception. There's, in a wealthier, we'll say family, they have other options.
Yeah, they can play tennis
and
golf.
And the husband and wife are both off to, doing their careers. And if they have children, it's not that big of a deal, maybe even for them to hire someone to raise them. But in order
they may not have others because it could be a burden to their lifestyle.
Now, there are exceptions, of course. There are some wealthy people who have big families. Mormons, religious reasons, big families. There's other religions where it's a big deal to them.
But it's not enough to make an impact on their situation.
That's exactly right. Because we're talking about it, relatively speaking, a smaller group of people doing it. But when it comes to just Gates talking about reducing population, and then the conspiracy theorists saying that he's doing this on purpose because he's an evil person.
Well, he is an evil person.
But what my point is that Gates's influence in the rest of the world is so small compared to what I'm seeing in the statistics here. We're already seeing in the very heavy populated areas.
I think that's parallel, though.
Because China's not really listening to Gates a whole lot, I don't think. They're doing their own thing, and they still have a population that's very, very limited as far as growth. And they're, of course, massive.
Yeah.
I'll look for China. But
I think that what you're saying is still parallel to what Bill is saying, because Bill is saying, like, this is already happening. So he's smart enough to already know that this is happening. So I think what Bill is saying is doing these vaccines, I'll just use that and the other, will help this. Will help the slowing of the population, not help it maintain and grow. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
So regardless of where we're at, in my opinion of what I hear from him is he wants to help it along. He wants to guide it on down a little bit, move it along. Let's go.
Yeah, he's certainly not opposed to depopulation.
Well, no, he's saying that all these things that he's willing to do.
Yeah, you got to save the environment.
Right. by going that algebra equation, because you're not going to get rid of the I wish you had it up there. I can't remember, but the energy or whatever the heck it was. You're not going to get rid of that part. You're not going to get rid of anything in between. You're going to get rid of what's creating, who needs all those other things. Yeah. You won't need any of that if the people aren't there.
Yeah. China's at 1.7. That's their current rate. Now, but going back, and I was actually kind of surprised to see it as low as it is.
I thought it was supposed to be at 1.
No, it's 2 children. They had.
Oh, was it 2?
I don't even know if they have this still implemented, but they had
lifted, but
because for a while China was saying you couldn't have more than 2 kids, and they were prioritizing boys. I think is what they were doing.
Oh yeah, that's why a lot of weird stuff was happening, because you can't take your name, and if you have 2 girls, is it 2 or 1? Okay, 2. but if you have girls, your name stops there.
Yeah.
You know, your family tree or your history.
Your bloodline looks a little bit different if you've got boys than if you have
Yeah.
girls. But as far as like, yeah, of course, Bill Gates, he's totally fine with depopulation because it corresponds with his vision of the climate and how the world will be impacted by it. But in this particular case, it's just like he doesn't have enough influence, I don't think, to force these things. I think it's already happening, and he's, of course, on board with it. But I'm kind of curious about your take on, well, what happens if there's a population decline?
Yeah, I tell you, I think there's a lot of. I think well, let's look at it. So I'm going to use COVID as a situation. There, a lot of people were shut in their doors were shut behind their doors and in their house
In lockdown.
And we saw a lot of amazing things happen in a short period of time. Animals came out and about where people usually were out. I think the biggest one for me was it didn't take very long for Italy. Is it Venice? Where they have the canals there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You could see
the bottom of the water.
And I have never seen that forever, I guess. But there's no doubt that we make an impact on this planet in a negative way, as well as a positive way, but still in a negative way. So I do believe that less people, less trash, less impact on the planet. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will I'll even go as far as to some people will say that will help on the global warming too, I suppose, so, that's somebody else's take. I know that we have an impact. I just don't know how much, but, it depends on how much, deterioration goes. I mean, I know that, there's going to be cities that could shut down. There could be less items produced, less skilled people, you don't know how it depends on how quick it goes.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like it's tapering down, but it's actually kind of going rather quick. So I don't know. I know there's some negative things that's going to happen with less people, but I know there's a lot of positive things that can happen too.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of thinking about the difference in population and what people's roles are. So, for instance, when healthcare is good, who takes advantage of healthcare? The older population.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So if there's a greater older population who's, maybe retirement age, where they're not really doing anything in society, they're certainly not the big movers. They're receiving more benefits from government.
Yeah,
they're really receiving more benefits from the younger generation who's doing most of the work. So if the birth rate is low, and there's fewer of those young people, and those young people eventually get old, and if healthcare is good, there's going to be more old people that are dependent on fewer and fewer young people.
Well, so I might have mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. So when I was in high school, I was doing this plan, and it was a senior project, and we had to make up our own country.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to make it successful, and you had your population, and it was all about adding numbers. There wasn't actually like a Sims, where
this is old school.
Yeah, little green numbers across the screen and a black screen. That was it. But so we had a certain amount of people, and we say, well, we need this many people to work. We need this many people doing this, and our population started growing, and then after a while, some of the younger people were getting old, and they were in retirement. And after a certain amount of time in retirement, our graph started showing that our country's being less successful because they're using some of the resources that they're not adding back into.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody did it their own way.
Did you screw with your population?
Oh, yeah. So what I did, and it makes it adds to the conspiracies, because I'm telling you what I did, because everything's are algorithms, so they're
all formulas,
right? Formulas,
creating, yeah.
And so I was talking to John. He's a smart kid. And poor guy, he got stuck with me. and and he didn't want to do what I wanted to do. But I'm like, dude, we're going to do it. I did strong arm a little bit. So I said, dude, let's just kill off all the retired people.
This is the guess that I had going on in my brain.
And so we did. And guess what? Our country was absolutely one of the best in the class being successful.
Oh, yeah.
But we were the only guys willing to gotta be careful the word kill off the when you retire, you're out of there. And it's heartless. It's a dictator, horrible Hitler type of looking at it.
Maybe a little immoral.
Absolutely. But it was very eye-opening, even just a kid being heartless and going, dude, we did a problem solving. What is eating up our success? What is the problems? Well, what if we just get rid of it? What if you had no heart? Get rid of it. Boom. So much more. I mean, seriously successful. And why? Example is Bill Gates and other people like him are extremely successful. What could be hampering some of their success could be, maybe too many freaking people that are just not adding to it. There could be something to it because everything's a freaking formula or algorithm. Hell, he has one.
Well, so with your little senior project deal, in terms of thinking in that, because I agree, if you get rid of the old people, the ones that are most dependent and not producing, then you would have a lot more success going on. So if the conspiracy theory was that Bill Gates was trying to kill old people, I'd totally be on board thinking that might be true. But because if you think about the majority of people, and just for COVID recently, the majority of old people that were impacted by COVID and its related diseases were older people, unhealthy, and those were prioritized for vaccinations and all this stuff. So if the vaccines were really designed to kind of thin the herd, which I'm not saying anything here, but if that was the conspiracy, I'd believe it more because ultimately it makes more sense. Get rid of the old people because you're going to have a much greater population of working people who contribute to the world.
That could be better sheep. A sheep that's laying there just going.
And if you start them early enough in elementary school, you can totally make them into your sheep that follow.
And get this though, the vaccines are said to, instead of getting off on the topic, please look it up or don't. But I'll say it this way: also, don't take my word 100% for it. But are said to possibly screw with a lot of people's ability to have kids.
Yeah, reproductive. Yeah.
So, whacking off. Damn it. I was trying not to say it that way. Little mob style, whacking off all the old people.
Still
doesn't sound right. But removing all the old people and then possibly sterilizing the young people makes that chart freaking drop like flies.
But the reality is, again, if you just look at what's going on with women and their choices, the options that they have in their life,
it may not even affect them because they're probably already going to say no.
It may not even have, we may not even have to worry about these sort of other things because women are already making a choice not to have as many children in the majority of these countries listed here. We're already seeing almost. Now, I looked around. Now, here's one. It says the Congo had sort of a flat, and then they grew, and then within the last little bit, they've sort of dropped back down. They're still at 5.8. Very few of these countries have an increase from previous years. Almost every single one that I've ever seen here is showing a decrease overall. So every country is decreasing. And my thought is a lot of these countries, as time goes on, a lot of these countries are starting to come up economically, and they've got more choices. And I really think that folks are making decisions not to have kids. I have a friend I used to work with that we used to play video games and hang out. And he and his wife, they're right around my age, decided early on that they were not going to have kids. And when I asked them, because a lot of his friends, I had, a kid at the time, and a lot of his circle of people had children, and figure, you'd probably be influenced by that. Might as well have kids yourself. But they made a decision not to have children. Why? Because this is what they said, because we're selfish. We want to enjoy life to its fullest. And if we really want to be around kids and whatever, we have enough friends and family who have children. That's where we'll get our fix. But for us, now we have the freedom, financial freedom. They have time freedom. They can go and travel. They can do all of these things with each other and not be burdened by the responsibility of a child or multiple children.
Yeah. I see that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who make those same decisions, maybe not as honestly as they did.
Because everybody gets their way out. Some people want to, travel to the other side of the planet. Somebody wants to, look in their own eyes and raise it and know what it's like to have, a loving child.
Well, I think that there's just a natural drive to have children. It's just the number of children. Like we were talking earlier, so many of the early humans needed more children in order to support their group, their family unit, or
it's whether they
their tribe,
to make them live.
Yeah, and the death rate by among children was very, very high, and a lot of the lifespan, we're talking 30 or 40 was old. To make it into your 40s was something, and now with modern medicine, we have people living into their 90s, and some rare into their 100 years.
Yeah.
And so now we've got a much larger population that's really dependent on that younger population.
Well,
they
better watch out.
You think about our own retirement in the United States, government retirement. It's totally paid for by people who are currently working.
Right.
All the people who are not working, who are taking from that fund, it's not sustainable if our population, if our birth rate continues to fall. And
that's how we're sticking it to the government.
Yeah.
Pretty soon we ain't gonna have nothing to give. Wait a minute.
But it would be different if we had a birth rate that was climbing, that was more than just sustainable. Then that may not look as bad. But right now, government is totally screwed at paying for this stuff if we don't have a population.
Again, there's one person that says, "Hey, this is a problem." Another person says, "Hey, this is needed."
Yeah.
I mean, people have two different agendas, and you know what? To be fair, Elon Musk is trying to depopulate it too. He's trying to take people and send their asses to Mars. That's less people on this planet. He's up to something.
It's funny. So immigration, though, that's a good point, because if you think about like the United States, I think I heard just recently that we had this last year over 2 million immigrants.
No, it was 17.
Just get arrested for illegally crossing the border, and that's above and beyond all the people who are in and now relocated. So our population growth has continued, but it's not because of the birth rate; it's because of immigration.
Right.
And that might open up. Who knows? It might open up in these other countries the opportunity to have more kids if they're moving and going someplace else.
You should look up a chart, not this one, because this is about birth rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you should look up the chart about population growth, and we'll see like Americans' population growth like this, and we'll see Mexico's population go down like this.
There's a direct correlation.
Oh my goodness.
Well, who knows? I don't know. Let's look up Mexico on this birth rate. I'm kind of curious where they're at with it, because China, was it 1.7?
Yeah, I believe you're right. Somewhere about that.
Yeah, I think there it is. 2.1 in Mexico.
Oh, see, they should be able to start climbing.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got more room. But look how steep that curve is down. So the numbers came out in 2019. They're currently at 2.1, but they've been on a decline for a little while now.
Well, those cartels are freaking out. They're killing a bunch of people. They're up to no damn good.
It is really kind of an interesting. Back in I want to say like 1950s, 1960s, there was some weird panic about overpopulation. Like people thought that the population growth was so substantial that there would be mass rioting, there would be famine, there would be just an unsustainable growth in population, and our world would not be able to handle it. Now this is like baby boomer time, right? Where right after World War II, when those folks came home and started making babies.
Let's celebrate we're alive.
That's right. But there's this big scare, and then I think there was a book. Gosh dang it, I can't remember what it was called. But there was a book that came out that talked about the scares of overpopulation, and it sort of caught on. And there were a lot of people who thought that not for climate, not for global warming or all this environmental stuff, but just because humans being humans, there's too many humans, we would end up killing each other. There'd be mass starvation because lack of food production.
Right.
And there was this big old panic. And what turned out is not that. In fact, birth rates started to decline because food production, there's been great advances in food production. We have plenty of food, by the way. Plenty of food.
What are you saying, dude?
We get food, especially like now with being able to move food around the world from one location. There's mass production, which is way more efficient. But there's this this increase in food production, increase in medical advances. So folks are living longer. Now there's more opportunity for those careers that we talked about earlier. Women are having fewer babies. Families are making decisions not to have as many children. And what's interesting is even some of those generations of those families, those kids are choosing not to have children. So the generation after, if you have two kids, both of those need to have two more kids.
Right.
And that's just not happening.
Right. So I want to point out to you, in America, 30 or 40% of food waste.
Mm-hmm.
That's a ton. I mean,
we're talking
people aren't eating
tons.
the crust.
Oh, jokes.
People aren't eating the crust on their bread, and a lot of it has to do with also is that we have to have example a banana that looks just the right way.
Yeah, we're picky.
We won't really
Aesthetics matter.
Not only that, in other countries, in fact, as a banana, speaking of a banana, I was watching people that were processing the bananas to send to America. And guess what? Bananas are all kinds of shapes and sizes. Or not sizes.
Yeah, they are actually, yeah.
But only the ones that are they have a go, no go. Like if you're measuring for crab or something.
Yeah.
Like this one goes, this one goes, this one, nope.
Yeah.
Don't even make it because it doesn't meet the size requirement because we find them unappealing to look at.
Mm-hmm.
But not only just that, but there's so much waste. And also, how many times have you ever flown on a plane and you look down and you see nothing? And then you'll see these, I mean, they're big, but then you go over these cities and now you start seeing where all the population is and you fly, most of your flight, there's nobody. This place could handle a whole hell of a lot more people, but you just have to homestead it, start up new areas. I mean,
but it's so true. You're talking about flying across middle America and it's just empty field. I mean, even just here in Oregon, when you start moving away from the forested area, you can really see there's not a whole lot of population.
Right.
It's so empty.
We're just all condensed in one area because everything's easy.
Yeah, the services and stuff. This was from a while ago, and I can't remember what they said exactly, but I don't know if it's even the big island of Hawaii. One of the islands of Hawaii, they were talking about if we took, and this was probably 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, if you took every single person from around the world, you could fit every single person shoulder to shoulder on that one island.
Wow.
And because there was that panic that we were just too many people, and they said, well, but in reality, there's a whole lot of empty space. And with food production and modern technology, we're doing just fine. And if you did put everyone side to side, you wouldn't really take up that much space.
Wow. Even Americans, like the overweight
even
ones
the big
like myself?
Even the big ones.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. Is that true? Or is that BS?
No, I think probably we'd probably have to figure out, okay, so what's 8 billion or 9 billion people shoulder to shoulder. How much space would that take up? But since I don't do math, maybe someone can throw down some comments in the comment section.
But I get their point. I mean, even if you were to tell me that everybody could fit in let's
One
say
state.
Oregon,
Yeah.
and that's pretty good size. That would still, that would kind of still shock me a little bit, So, but we have tons more room to grow. And whether we create more harm to the environment, that's not my point. It's that we still have the ability, and people could still harvest, food and get animals and reproduce them and eat and still make it happen. You don't have to always be in a city, and and just build upwards. You could go outwards. Well, that's another point. You could build upwards too, and still have more people. So
I think it's always about what services and food,
amenities, and
I mean, of course,
close by.
We talked about this on another podcast where the basics of what people need is food, shelter, including water, and then there's a level of protection, and it's like, so if we have those things covered for the most part, then you probably could grow. But every species out there have different growth rates depending on where they're located and what the resources are. You can see some years there's like huge like bug infestations,
Sure.
And then suddenly the next year they're not there anymore. Same thing with like rodents, other even big game. There are impacts to population based on what resources are available and what dangers might exist. Where COVID is just one of many other viruses we're going to experience, and it's going to hit us at some point again. And depending on the technology and our ability to adapt to those sort of things, we're going to see changes in our population. But what we're seeing right now seems to be artificial, meaning we're making those choices. It's not an outside environmental impact. It's not a virus. It's not war. It's not food shortages. It's because we're making decisions as a population just not to have as many babies.
Well, if we didn't do half of that, if half of that stuff didn't happen, I agree, didn't happen, our population would be more sustainable. But, we're always going to have war,
Yeah.
I mean, there's unfortunately, we're always going to have. I mean, look at cancer. Look at nobody's going to stop driving cars. Nobody's going to stop murdering everybody. I mean, my wife and I were sitting there watching a. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong. Never mind. I was watching a show about a serial killer, and they were talking like in L.A. that there was 1,000 murders. And I was going to tell you that how in how long I'm going to mess it up, but it was in such a short period of time, and it blew my mind. Like, oh my gosh, people are just out there offing people left and right, and it just blows me away. I mean, that there's so many things that people are dying from literally every single day. Like, I don't know how many people like died in Oregon from every single thing possible in one day. It'd probably blow you away.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and of course there has to be a birth rate that's high enough to replace that population
right.
if it's going to grow. But it's a fascinating sort of idea that to consider, what does this world look like if people aren't reproducing but yet living longer lives and get to an age where they no longer are contributing or producing to the welfare of anyone else, let alone the environmental impacts. You're talking about being able to see the bottom of the water in Venice, or see the mountains in China from
That's
the
right.
city.
Yeah, right. It didn't take very long.
No, it didn't. It took a few weeks, and then suddenly the environmental impact it was very obvious. So, but it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, because we've seen, it seems to me like people are so concerned about overpopulation because you start seeing the growth boundaries in your local city. The houses are getting built and moving out and taking over farmland. So people start getting concerned. I heard that we might be someplace around 11 billion as a world population, and that's pretty much where we would peak out.
Well, but that's the thing is these cities and areas that we live in, they're not expanding much. They're just consolidating in it. They're just staying in it, and so it might seem like our traffic's worse. Everything is getting more compact, but we're not utilizing our space well. But and then again, nobody wants to drive 5.5 hours to get to your job. It'd be beautiful to be living out in nowhere. Nobody, but if you have to be able to sustain your life.
Yeah, I'm not a city dweller, so I'm not used to what it would be like to live in some high rise in downtown New York or whatever. But those folks are doing just fine. I prefer to be away from more people. So when we're looking at depopulation, I go, well, does that make more free space for me? Maybe I'm a little bit more selfish, but I don't think that this is. I look at it as if there's more old people than young people to do the important stuff, replacing workforce and all this other stuff, then we could be in trouble because we have way too many people who are dependent.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but the kids that we do have, they don't want to do a damn thing.
That's true.
So they're not going to give two craps about grandma or grandpa or even their parents, because they're just going to want to take what their parents have when they go and do nothing else.
And that will further the decline of our society. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Oh my gosh, you're starting to depress me, Dave. We're gonna end the show here, and everyone's gonna be like,
know how my
"Oh,
wife
God,
feels. 20 years of me
wasted an hour of my time in the car listening to these guys. Woe is me." Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up. I think.
Yeah, that's what Bill Gates wants us to do.
That's true. He's
stop that birth rate. Slow it down. Wrap it up.
Provide us with those. Yeah, we'd be kind of curious though if you guys are seeing this on YouTube. Put some comments in there. I'm kind of curious where the conversation goes.
Yeah,
it's an interesting topic.
Yep.
All right. I guess you can find more information on our website.
Nevertooserious.com.
Yeah, find us on social media. We are on Twitter, Gettr, and Parler at the NTS Podcast.
Yeah.
And until we see you next time, take care.
And be safe.